Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, I'd like to bring in our analyst and co-host. He is a contributor to the Daily Norseman, along with many other blogs across the interwebs. Bringing in Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing great. The Vikings won this week in a weird way to end the game. I say weird because we won it, because we don't necessarily have a history of pulling out games in the very last seconds. It's not something that we as a team have been doing lately. I'm just not. This team is just weirding me out a little bit. I don't think. And speaking as a Vikings fan, and I imagine many of you out there had the same thought, like, there's no way Blair Walsh actually makes that if Mike Zimmer isn't the coach, right? Like, there's just some mystique about that.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, like, there's no way the offense drives far enough downfield. Like, it just doesn't happen, right?
No, it's just not a thing. It's like Favre in 2009 when he hit Greg Lewis. Like, no other quarterback hits that. Like, it's just you walked in with a little bit of confidence. Like, oh no, we could win this. It's not completely hopeless that we could walk out of here with a W. It's improbable, but we could do it.
It's certainly within the realm of possibility. I can imagine a universe.
I can imagine a universe in which this takes place. So no, it's we won. We escaped with a victory, and it's been good. I would like to thank our listeners for tuning in. In case you're new to the show or would like to make sure that you are up to date on all the episodes, you can join us and subscribe on iTunes. You can go also on Stitcher. We have our RSS feed, and NorseCodePodcast.com is officially updated again, along with our links on the Daily Norseman. But just a quick note: we are listener supported. We do not have ads for other programs or other products. You won't hear us shilling for anything other than for you. So we'd like to thank you and thank our newest supporter, Alan Loughran from Bellevue, Washington, who gave us the note: love the podcast and love how interactive you guys are with the Vikings fan base. Supporting from the Northwest, let's pull out a win on December 6th. I have to assume that's the Seahawks game, correct?
Well, instead of just checking, yeah. Let's just ask. No, it's...
I mean, Google is literally like inches from my fingers, but I feel like I should just ask you as our expert that you should just know the dates of games. Like, why is this something you don't just have tattooed on the inside of your eyelids?
It's the Seahawks game. Actually, that's going to be tough because not just because it's the Seahawks and you know it's the Seahawks, but also because there's a Thursday night game after that. So that'll be a fun set of games to deal with. The Thursday night game is a Cardinals game, so great stretch. Hopefully the $40 will get us closer to winning that game.
I feel like it's just, we're just throwing hope at it. Give us money for hope. That's how it's working. But thank you again for your donation. We truly do appreciate it. It helps keep the lights on. And if you would like to donate to Norse Code, you can certainly do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. There's a little donate button at the bottom of the page. You can also go through the Patreon page, which is linked at NorseCodePodcast.com and is also linked at the Daily Norseman page for each show. So you can do that. I was talking to Dusty, and that was probably my first mistake on this train of thought. But I was talking to Dusty, and we were discussing potential ways of advertising without actually advertising. And I came up with something interesting. You know how people who are really into Ayn Rand will like spray paint on like buildings or put up stickers that say like, who is John Galt? And it's supposed to inspire the person to Google it and then like actually read the book and then theoretically fall in love with the idea that selfishness is a virtue. Like, I'm thinking we could do that with like, who is Arif M. Hassan or who is Arif Hassan NFL? people spray painting, or not spray painting, because I don't want to do anything illegal, but stickering things, and then who is Norse Code DN, and or who is Norse Code.
So you want to start a guerrilla marketing campaign for the podcast?
I feel like we have momentum. We've just had we beat our total for last month, which was our highest total of listens. We beat that by over 1,000. I feel like we have momentum. I feel like we can get boots on the ground on this. If Ayn Rand supporters can do this, I feel like we can organize as well.
I have no problem with that. I certainly won't object to listeners of the podcast engaging in a guerrilla marketing campaign for the podcast. I will say I do find it maybe a little unlikely. I just don't know if the podcast inspires the same kind of zeal as objectivism does, because objectivism functionally just tells you, hey, you could be selfish. It's okay. It's moral, in fact, to be selfish. And the podcast is like, look, I don't know if things are looking great, guys.
The Norse Code Podcast, the #1 source for your Vikings news and Ayn Rand hot takes. That's where we're at this week, apparently. I had no idea this was going to end up happening, but I mean, we may have to go into that in another show. But again, this has been a great month for donations, a great month for listens. Thank you to the listeners. We really do appreciate it. It's fun to look at the numbers and see that we're having some sort of a nice month. We're having people listen to us, and it definitely helps encourage new shows to come out when you see that you're not just talking to yourself and like 2 friends. It's more like 8, and we thank each and every one of you. Thank you.
Yeah, all 8 of you. Well, all 7 of you and Dusty twice. We really, really appreciate that.
I check. I always check the show on my phone right after I post it. So I mean, that probably counts for a listen in there too.
Oh, excellent. That's good. I think we're definitely pumping the numbers in our favor.
We might be back to 5 then.
Well,
anyway.
I think. Well, do you have any other mobile devices like tablets?
I could. That's what you should be doing. Let's just inflate the numbers and let's get to 100,000 this year. And instead of just playing it on 1 device, why not play it on 3? Post it on Reddit. It'll be great. Again, thank you for listening. We are going to get into the show now and talk about the Bears-Vikings shenanigans. And I feel like shenanigans is the best term for what ended up happening in Chicago. First things first, before we talk about the offense or the defense, that field has to be nuked from space, right? Like, that field is easily in the top 5 worst fields in the entire country.
Oh, I think there's a really good chance of that. I mean, it's bad, and I think that now that the Texans they've taken steps to sort of fix their field. They're replacing because they had like units of grass, and then people would trip on the seams between the units, and that would cause injuries. They've replaced that, I think, with artificial turf. So that removes one of the biggest like competitors, I think, to Chicago for having like the worst field in the country. It's like that FedEx Field, I think, and then maybe the Coliseum in Oakland. I think those are really. Yeah, I think that's it. Chicago's definitely.
Let's not forget Levi Stadium.
Oh, right. Well, that's new. So
I mean, that's a new entry, but that has to be like right up there. And I feel like we would be not doing our duty if we didn't also include not necessarily the field, but just the building, the one that the Rams play in, that seems to be injuring everyone when they like go off of the field. Like when they hit the cement track.
Yeah, the cement or concrete track on the outside. Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Yeah, concrete with a nice concrete area that just happens to be terrible if you happen to be having cleats on. You can tear an ACL pretty quickly. Like,
I like that we're just like adding to this list. Like, what's wrong with the NFL that we're just like,
let's sit here and talk about the things
we have to debate the most injury-prone fields.
Because AP had his injury over at the Redskins over at their stadium, and
although I still don't know if that was because of Deshaun Gomez or the field. It may be a combination of the two, but yeah,
it may be a combination. And to be fair, Matt Forte had his injury that they haven't necessarily like said enough about on the Bears field. Although Harrison Smith was a freaking brick wall there. So I mean, 50,
he was probably the primary. He was probably the primary cause. The proximate cause of that meme.
I will not have you dirty the name of Harrison Smith on this podcast. This was all field. This had everything to do with the field. And I suppose if we want to throw in fields that injure people, I mean, Matt Stafford was good and bloody after playing at TCF Bank. He did end up having to wear something on his arm and elbow after his elbow hit the bricks, quite literally. So there's that. So enough talking about the field. Let's talk about the game. And it would be nice if we didn't have to lead the show off again with a subpar play discussion of Teddy Bridgewater. But here we go again. We had 55 minutes of questionable plays at best. I know that you have gone on Twitter recently and have discussed how the first 2 drives of Bridgewater weren't necessarily terrible. Could you kind of extrapolate on that? And I'm not saying talk everyone off a ledge because he didn't have that great a game, but just kind of explain the first 2 series anyway, and why this wasn't a bad performance by him necessarily.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I think not necessarily talking someone off the ledge. I think that's a good way to put it, because I don't want to say Teddy had a good game, because he didn't, right?
That would definitely be a lie, and we're trying not to lie to our listeners. Trying.
Yeah, right. But I will say that, and this has happened pretty consistently throughout the season. I don't know if this is because I'm looking for this to be true, or if because we're consistently missing some context here that's pretty important, and it may be a bit of both. But every time I take a look at the game through the All-22, it always seems like Teddy's been playing a lot better than we gave him credit for, and a lot better doesn't mean good, because we thought he played like shit. But he just played bad, and so that's like an upgrade. But in these first 2 drives specifically, I think Teddy Bridgewater had a much better set of drives. And mind you, I don't think the Vikings scored points in either of those drives, so it's not as if he lit the world on fire or anything on those drives. But that Mike Wallace drop happened on the first drive, and then after that, Teddy was, I believe, he was forced out of bounds. And in that drive, you take a look at his third down pass, and no one was open, and so your best shot was the Mike Wallace pass. And in the second drive, he made actually a couple of really good throws, including one, I think it was to Kyle Rudolph in a really tight window past the sticks. And again, on third down, no one was open. And of course, it's on the quarterback to find areas and windows to put it in the receiver's hands and stuff like that. But on plays where he had opportunities to make a play, and this happens to every quarterback, there are plays where you just don't have the opportunity to make a play. But on plays where he did have opportunities to make a play, he really did, make a play. He did a really good job of finding open spaces and getting it to open receivers. I know Paul Ellen mentioned it on the show that hey, maybe Teddy was a little bit too focused on Stephon Diggs, and it's true that in the first drive, he threw into Stephon Diggs and Kyle Fuller deflected the ball, and there is probably a window where he could have thrown it where Stephon Diggs would have had exclusive access to the ball. But I actually kind of doubt that most quarterbacks, or maybe even all quarterbacks, would consistently be able to make the throw with the kind of coverage that Fuller had, even though Stephon Diggs looked open at the time of the throw. I thought it was just amazing coverage. I thought that he did as well as he could with what he had. I thought he did a really good job in response to pressure. I think that in those 2 drives alone, there were instances of offensive line confusion in terms of covering blitzing players. I don't think Vic Fangio is dumb or anything, but I don't think the defense was necessarily all that innovative. I think that Fangio just did a good job of designing a corner blitz that TJ Clemmings didn't pick up on, designing stunts that Khalil didn't pick up on, that sort of thing. And that kind of pressure was pretty bad, and Teddy responded to that pressure really well. He didn't throw, a turnover or anything like that. He didn't actually make a bad throw, and he actually stiff-armed a dude. I think it was on the quarterback blitz, and then made a play. So, I thought that he played pretty well in the first 2 drives, and actually for quite a bit of the second quarter too. So really, when we're talking about Teddy's bad game, we're talking about maybe half of the second quarter, all of the third quarter, and maybe the beginning of the fourth quarter, if I'm remembering sort of the sequence of events correctly. Which is not to say, again, he didn't have a good game. It's not to say he had a good game, but it is to say all of this criticism that Teddy, was subject to, is from a fairly isolated set of time and drives. And when you think about it like that, it's kind of absurd to see, how upset people got on Twitter and even in columns and articles about Teddy's play, because every quarterback has a few bad drives, and it's true, not every quarterback, has a few bad drives that are strung together in like a sequence. But I do think that, like, a lot of people were pretty upset about Bridgewater when really he only had a couple of bad drives, and that overthrow to Wallace, that was really freaking bad. Like, there's no question that that's just an example of Teddy Bridgewater not really having a feel for those 9 routes or routes that don't break at a particular depth. And the interception, like, it's just like the batted passes, that stuff's not good, and that's stuff that he needs to fix, and he needs to make decisions sometimes a little bit quicker. But he had some good moments in the game that were not, just in those final 5 minutes and those final 2 drives. He had some really good throws early in the game too, and he had some good throws even on those bad drives. So I think that the way people have been reacting to this game, like it's a good. Like it's a good evaluation of Teddy, is kind of weird, especially because the response I saw on Twitter was really like dramatically different. So like when Teddy, was playing, a lot of people were like, well, he's had such a bad year this year. I mean, his game against Denver, his game against San Diego, his game against San Francisco, and they list a litany of games that they say that he performed poorly in. And then, and sometimes it's the same people, sometimes it's different people. When Aaron Rodgers was struggling against Denver, they were like, well, Teddy, he played better than Aaron Rodgers did against Denver, so look at that.
You're like, and you can't have it both ways, you car truthers. You can't do it.
You're right. Right, exactly. And it's just like, he either had a good game against Denver or he didn't, according to you guys, and that's a conclusive evidence of something. I don't know. It was both, actually. He had a really good, second half, a really, really good and inspired second half against Denver, and a really shit first half against Denver. And I think both of them are kind of examples of how Teddy's year has been going. He had a poor performance in the first half against San Diego and a great performance in the second half. And I think that the second half stuff is more representative of the kind of quarterback that we have than the first half stuff. And it's not because, I'm eternally optimistic. I think longtime listeners to the podcast know that I'm not, super optimistic about a lot of stuff. But I think it's because he displays consistently good qualities that lead to quarterback wins. Things like, poise in the pocket, things like decision-making skills, things like accuracy, which, of course, has been troubling at times, and especially at different levels of the field. But he's fundamentally, he's a good quarterback that displays good quarterback qualities. Like, a lot of people talk about how Cam Newton is having an MVP-type season. I don't know if I would go that far. He's having an excellent season. And you look at his passing numbers, and they're bad. But, not many people are really contesting that the passing numbers don't match his performance. I mean, he's had wide receiver drops. I mean, he's working, like, Ted Ginn is his best receiver. I mean, I guess if you want to include Greg Olsen, whatever. But, like, people are including all of that context, and they're not doing that for Teddy. And, it's not a surprise that he's doing well when Stephon Diggs is playing. Stephon Diggs had a fairly bad game until those final 2 drives, too, and no one was talking about that. Of course, he's a rookie. He's only had a couple of starts, so maybe people want to be a little bit more lenient when it comes to Diggs, but he actually had not a great game until the very end. So, it's not surprising that Teddy is putting up poor numbers, but in context could actually be doing pretty well. I mean, take a look at the Vikings offense. They're like 14th in like DVOA or something like that. And that's not because of Adrian Peterson. We were talking about how in previous podcasts how Adrian Peterson was a net negative for the offense. In this game, he wasn't. Against Chicago, he was actually, quite good and pretty consistent, and he didn't have many negative yards, if any. But for the most part, I thought that he hurt more than he helped, and the offense was still, ranked 14th by some metrics and ranked 16th by some other metrics. It's a good scoring offense, and Teddy is a big part of that, especially when you consider the struggles that Blair Walsh had early in the year. To have a kicker who's struggling and to still put it together like a league average offense, like, I don't know how much the quarterback is really struggling in that case.
And you can take a look at the play of Diggs, and he didn't necessarily have a great first half, but man, that touchdown they ended up turning on, and the play right near the end of the game. It's like, man, that Diggs is really, really good. And we've talked about it on the show before, obviously, but man, this is just fun to watch. And can Bridgewater really be having a bad game if he ends up turning out the last like 5 minutes of the game like he did?
Yeah, well, that's kind of like the Eli Manning question, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. I think that if I'm going to be like consistent in my criticism of quarterbacks, like I've always been fairly critical of Andrew Luck for putting his team in a hole and then digging himself out of it, and only getting credit for digging himself out of it, which we saw a lot last year and the year before and the year before that. But now we're seeing what happens when he can't dig the team out of it. And Andrew Luck is under a lot of criticism. We just saw an offensive coordinator get fired. We'll talk about that in a little bit. If I'm going to be consistent about my criticisms of quarterbacks, I should be consistent about the fact that, having a quarterback who puts the team in a hole, and that interception, that was bad. And that interception, of course, led to a point swing, right? Because, the Bears scored off of that turnover. So in a sense, Teddy Bridgewater had to dig himself out of the hole that he created and take the team with him. I think that those are the kind of quarterbacks you don't want. You want a quarterback who has the ability to win a game, but you'd prefer a quarterback who can avoid getting in that situation in the first place. And I think the single best example of that is Aaron Rodgers, whose biggest weakness is comebacks. And a lot of people will say, well, his defense isn't helping him or whatever. But he's like 0-24 in situations where they're down by more than 9 points at halftime. He has one of the worst quarterback comeback percentages of any quarterback who's played at least 50 games or something like that for the past 16, 20 years, something like that. He's really bad at comebacks, and it's because he's risk averse, and it's that style of play that allows him to be so dominant early in games. And he's one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the NFL right now. And so I would take that over somebody who puts yourself in a hole but has the ability to get yourself out of the hole. Ted Bridgewater right now is, in fact, one of the best quarterbacks in fourth quarter comeback opportunities. He's 500 in game-winning drives and fourth quarter comeback opportunities, which places him third, I think, of active quarterbacks in the list right now. Small sample, of course, but he's had a lot of comeback opportunities, so maybe not that small a sample. So, yeah, I think you can say that he had a bad game, even knowing that he pulled them out of it. And I think that you want to make him strive to be the kind of quarterback that prevents that situation in the first place. And if he can be both the kind of quarterback that prevents that situation in the first place and can lead you, from those situations, then you've got, peak Peyton Manning, like 2004, 2006 Peyton Manning, or 2007 Tom Brady. You've got a really fucking good quarterback. So, yeah, I think I like that Teddy can come back from things, and I think that the step that he needs to take is to stop having to come back from things.
Let's talk about Matt Khalil for a moment. We haven't said his name much in the past couple of weeks, and that's a positive. I feel like good offensive linemen shouldn't have to be mentioned. Like, it's one of those, if you're doing your job right, then no one should be able to tell that you're doing your job at all. Like, it's just it's just happening there. It's good. He did really well this week, and I wanted to commend him. But is this a result of good play by the offensive line, or abysmal play by the defense of Chicago?
No, I thought that, and when we say that he did really well, he did do very well in some aspects of the game, and he did very poorly in other aspects of the game. I don't think it's a result of the defense he is up against, because the kind of things that he did well are the kind of things that translate pretty well. He was a really, really good run blocker in this game, which is kind of surprising and kind of confusing and not kind of who he is. He was kind of a mediocre pass blocker, but he was a really, really good run blocker, which translated to a lot of things in terms of Adrian Peterson's play, of course. But yeah, I don't know, because he's been up against some pretty good pass rushers. I mean, he did pretty poorly, of course, in the Denver game, but it's not like Kansas City has poor pass rushers. He did pretty all right there. Detroit has some pretty good pass rushers. He did pretty all right there. San Diego's defense, they kind of can only feature pass rushers, and they're sometimes good, sometimes bad. He did pretty good there. And even in the San Francisco game, where everybody did poorly, he did well. So, the level of competition he's up against, I think, is higher than the level of competition the Vikings holistically have been up against. So, this is somebody that I think has figured it out, maybe, and that means a lot of good things, of course.
Adrian Peterson had a fun little game. He really looked like Brett Favre, like, meme aside, he looked like a kid out there. He was just having so much fun running against the Bears defense. He averaged over 5 yards a carry and was just burning them. Ended up with 103, I believe. Yep, 103 yards. Averaged 5.1, and his longest was only 12. So it's not like last game where it was like famine, 75 yards, famine. Like, it wasn't any of that. It was just nice and steady. AP had a pretty decent game.
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely isn't the result of outliers like it has been in previous games. And we mentioned a little bit earlier that AP has been a little bit of a liability despite, those big runs. And in this game, he did pretty well. And he did pretty well no matter kind of where he ran. If it was, to the left end, if it was up the middle, if it was on the right end. He was averaging basically, 4 or 5 yards a carry on everywhere. And so it wasn't just sort of necessarily the quality of the offensive line because, some of the members of the offensive line did struggle a little bit. But, he was a little bit more decisive. I thought at the beginning of the game he actually wasn't that decisive because he's taking a little bit of time to make decisions. But it worked out, of course, at the beginning. And then, he was taking less time to make decisions and it was working out just as well. So that's really nice to see. Obviously he doesn't have the same kind of firepower that he had before, but he's running with power. And most importantly, he's running, I think, with agility and decisiveness. So, yeah, if he continues running like this, I'll shut up about him. He played really well.
It would be nice if we could just, eliminate some of those garbage runs, like some of those dance, -2, dance, -4, that sort of thing. It'd be a nice change of pace, I feel, but that's just one man's opinion, I suppose. Charles Johnson. A bit of a forgotten person in the pass for wide receivers, but dude had a real clutch catch, and that wasn't exactly the best of throws either. It really looked like Teddy just threw it up with the hopes that someone could come down with it.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that throw because I still haven't made a decision about the throw. From Teddy, like whether or not it was a bad throw, whether or not it was an okay throw, whether or not it was actually a pretty good throw. Because if Teddy, and this is like a long distance, right? So it's actually kind of difficult to gauge this kind of thing. That's a reason quarterbacks have defined depths and can't just read depth. But if Teddy knows where the safety is, because I think it was Antrell Roll, if he knows where the safety is when he throws the ball, then he knows that Charles Johnson is going to have his break before where the safety is. Maybe. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he threw to a predesignated spot without considering the safety. Maybe, he threw it in such a way that it was actually easy to win a contested catch if Antrell Roll wasn't going to sit there like a catcher and instead try to catch for the ball. I have no idea if that was a good throw. But you could make all the arguments in the world that it was a bad throw and I would listen to them. So that's fair. But Charles Johnson, absolutely. There was a great catch. I like that he was willing to go up and get it. A lot of people are saying, hey, he made a contested catch. It wasn't a physical contested catch, and that's kind of the thing that we've been getting at him for. So it's not like the criticism of him is resolving itself in any way. But I do think it gives him a little bit more time, especially with Mike Wallace struggling. So I think that, it would be really nice because I think that Mike Wallace is not going to stay with the team in 2016. And so it would be really nice if Charles Johnson could step up and take that wide receiver 2 responsibility. And that's not to say the Vikings shouldn't acquire a wide receiver in free agency or get one in the draft. But if Charles Johnson can take the kind of, maybe, I don't know what you want to call it, confidence boost or the kick in the pants or whatever it was that that might come from this game and turn it into taking a couple more snaps every game from Mike Wallace, that would be tight.
I was gonna say, you don't hear the phrase "kick in the pants" enough on a daily basis. That's what Norse code is for. We're here to give you a nice kick in the pants. Sure.
Yeah, we've adopted the personality of Mike Zimmer.
Exactly. Or I was gonna say, what was the name of he's in our ending. He's in our little post roll for the show Singletary. Can't coach him. Can't live with him. Can't do it. Like, just giving a nice little pep talk there. If we can just have a nice moment of silence for the Bears special teams that gave up a fantastic Marcus Sherrill's run back. That looked to be about as easy a run back as you could. It looked, you know what it looked like? It looked like one of those run backs against the Vikings that would happen in that stadium with the player that shall just not be named. It looked a bit like one of those. It was just a nicely timed touchdown by Marcus Sherrill's.
Yeah, at the time I tweeted out something like, "What does it feel like, Chicago?" or something like that, because it was fantastic to see it happen to them instead of from them. It's been so long, and Chicago is the team that I kind of wanted it to happen to most. It was a great run. It was fantastically blocked. I don't know. It was great. I like Marcus Sherrill's a lot, and he keeps on proving sort of why he stays on the roster. I mean, people have been calling for him to. It feels like at least 40% of the fan base, every single year except his first one, have been calling for him to be cut in favor of, whatever punt returner we feel we have, that year. This year it's Diggs, who, probably could be a pretty good punt returner if we're being honest. But, last year was Adam Thielen, the year before, I don't know, Josh Robinson, I don't even remember the year before. But, it's good to see. It's good to see Marcus Sherrill's continue to prove his worth because the Vikings did make an investment in him again. So, hooray. And also, screw you, Chicago. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, that is what it feels like. That is why you lost, is because you let Marcus Sherrill's run right down that field for a touchdown. I just sat and watched the replay of that like 3 or 4 times and just going, oh my God, it finally happened. We might actually, I wasn't convinced we were going to win until I saw that. There's a real good chance we're going to win this, which may just show that the way for the Vikings to beat the Bears in Chicago is to just make sure that you get a special teams touchdown like that. That's just how it has to happen. If you don't get
we'll just do that. Yeah,
let's just make sure that this happens next year when we play in Soldier Field, and let's just keep it going and go from there. Let's move on to the defense, and let's first talk about Harrison Smith, who is the killer of hopes and dreams. Matt Forte ran into that brick wall of Harrison Smith and ended up out for the game, and Jay Cutler. Oh man, that goal line. that was rough. Dude.
Yeah, I'm surprised Jay Cutler won that battle. Well,
yeah, I like the quote from the post game. It's like, do you regret lowering your shoulder? Oh yeah, that that was a Job from Arrested Development moment. I have made a huge mistake.
No, it's interesting because Harrison Smith also took Demaryius Thomas out of the Denver game. If we want to, sort of add to the mythos of Harrison Smith, let's say that he sent Matt Stafford to the X-ray machine twice, because he did hit Matt Stafford in both of those games. He took Matt Forte, unfortunately, out for the season. Obviously that was unintentional, but. The dude hits really hard. Holy crap! We remember. I think a couple years ago. I think he was his sophomore year, maybe his rookie year, but I think it was his sophomore year. Brandon Marshall was asked, who's the hardest hitting safety in the NFL, and it didn't take him very long. And Brandon Marshall, he's played for multiple teams and he's played, for a long time, and he said Harrison Smith, right? And he'd already played against Cam Chancellor at that point, And he said Harrison Smith without a question. Calvin Johnson, I think, was asked a similar question either a year later or in the same year, and he said Harrison Smith too. And, of course, he had pretty good reason to say that because I think he lost 2 touchdowns just to Harrison Smith hits. So, yeah, the Harrison Smith, when he's playing like this, is a nightmare for opposing offenses. And it's really he could be – I think maybe the best comparison to how he's playing right now in terms of both, the style of play and the effect that he has on teams, it could be sort of Troy Polamalu. And I'm saying that without exaggeration. I think Harrison Smith is playing at an extremely high level, and the impact that he's having on teams is kind of similar. Polamalu had a lot more, obviously, latitude in Pittsburgh in terms of what he could do. They basically designed the scheme around the fact that he could just be anywhere at any time, and he has the choice. Harrison Smith doesn't have that. So it's not, a very great comparison. But I think that when you think about sort of, the speed, the impact that it has on the running game, the power, and even, his contribution sort of in pass defense, because Polamalu, used obviously very, very good coverage safety as well, and a playmaking coverage safety. And when he got interceptions, it's a good chance he could return it for a touchdown. Same with Harrison Smith. I think that's a pretty good comparison, and I think that we don't have to hold ourselves back when comparing Harrison Smith to Hall of Famers anymore, because I think that if he continues to play at this level and the rest of the viewing public realizes it, I think that he's on a trajectory that could put him in Hall of Fame consideration. I mean, he's that good, and hitting that hard is part of it.
I was gonna say, mentioning his name in the same breath as Polamalu is a pretty high. It's pretty cool. High praise.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he's playing at peak Polamalu or anything like that.
But he has ways to go. Like this, I don't know if this is necessarily like peak Harrison Smith either. Like he can get better, and that's what's scary. Yeah,
and I think mostly it's a stylistic comparison, not a talent comparison. But it's certainly, I'm not leaving the talent comparison off the table for sure. He has room to add. He's been adding, I think, every season. I think his rookie year he was great, right? And he's been adding to that every season and improving in every season. I mean, he can play man coverage now. He couldn't do that his first 2 years. That's fantastic. He's been adding to his game every season. He's becoming a huge, huge asset for the Vikings. And it sounds like the Vikings may potentially regret not trying to extend them sort of earlier in the year. But whatever. They're going to lock him down for a while, and that's going to be great. Love it.
So let's move on to Terrence Newman for a moment. And Newman had a pretty decent game out there, out on the corners. It was the announcers kept saying his name. It's like, Newman's getting some work in today.
Yeah, and a lot of it was in run support, which is really nice. He actually had a couple good hits, I think, of both Langford and Forte. He had some pretty good tackles, good form tackles. He did a great job in terms of adding to the Vikings' impenetrability against wide receiver screens, Albert Wilson excluded. I think that, and in coverage, he was good. I would say that, at points he had been assigned Alshon Jeffrey too. It wasn't like Rhodes just shadowed Alshon Jeffrey the entire game, although if he did, maybe it wouldn't have mattered. But, Terrence Newman, he had a pretty good game. Alshon Jeffrey, did some work against him. I think he had a 28-yard gainer on him, and part of that was 25 yards of yak. But for the most part, Alshon Jeffrey's receptions against Newman were of the short or screen variety that didn't do much. And no one else, maybe Eddie Royal got him once, I'm trying to remember. But I think no one else really got the better of him, certainly not for any significant yardage. So he did do a pretty good job of forcing the Bears into sort of a one-dimensional defense when he wasn't on Alshon Jeffrey. When he was on Alshon Jeffrey, he actually did, my guess is he did a better job than the numbers showed. I'm looking at his coverage statistics right now. Actually,
he did better than Sendejo anyway.
Well, yeah.
That's not hard.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's maybe not the bar you want to compare him to. I pulled up the Pro Football Focus numbers. Yeah, it was one catch to Eddie Royal, 28 yards was the long gain for Alshon Jeffrey against him. 25 of that was yak, which means that the other 4 receptions were not for an amazing amount of yardage, just under 40 yards. I think for the most part, he did pretty well when he was up against other people. And did okay against Alshon Jeffrey, considering the game that Alshon Jeffrey had.
Speaking of Alshon Jeffrey, Xavier Rhodes, what's going on with our number one corner?
Yeah, I don't know. He's had some struggles in the past couple of games. A lot of them injury related. We've been talking on the show a little bit, or not injury, sorry, penalty. Whoa, way different. Penalty related. And we were talking on the show a little bit. What if you take away his penalties? Is he still good in some of those games? Yeah, he is. He had some pretty good games, penalties excluded. In this game, you can't really say that. Some of those throws you can't do anything about. It's like
Aaron Rodgers back shoulder to Jordy Nelson. Like, no talent at cornerback is going to let you really prevent that. And that was the Alshon Jeffrey touchdown, honestly. I thought, Xavier Rhodes was doing a really, really good job on that play. And it's not just, we've said this about like Chris Cook, and we've said this about, other corners that the Vikings have had. They're in the right position. They just didn't make a play. They turned their head around. They could be really good. That's not really what happened. Xavier Rhodes not only turned his head around, his hands were in the perfect spot. And the throw was perfect, and the catch was perfect. And Alshon Jeffrey physically is built for that kind of play. His elevation was perfect. You can't really play that pass that much better. I mean, yeah, you could maybe play it a little bit better, but not to the point where you nitpick a corner for that particular play. Other than that, he did have a lot of struggles in the game, of course. I think that he did a good job, isolating Jeffrey when he was on screenplays. Again, something the Vikings really good at. But, he lost Jeffrey a little bit. He got bodied by Jeffrey a little bit. Didn't win the contested catches situations as often as you'd like. And then when he wasn't on Jeffrey, he did pretty well. That's kind of what happens. But yeah, I think that we can maybe ask the question maybe at this point, like, what can we do to elevate Xavier Rhodes' place that he plays as well as he did last year? Because if he plays as well as he did last year, I mean, he's nearly a Pro Bowl quality cornerback.
I was just trying to look up the information on Rhodes and his penalties, because it seemed like he didn't end up having too many of them this last game, considering he's the most penalized player on the Vikings.
Yeah, I don't know if he got any penalties in this game. I can take a quick look. Let's see. Yeah, he didn't get any penalties in this game. In fact, the only player on the defense who did get a penalty was Chad, and that was a bullshit penalty. So
I was sitting
Vikings
there.
Continued.
I was sitting there because that was a roughing the passer call, and I'm sitting there watching that play, just thinking to myself, man, it'd be just so nice to hit Cutler, and then he got whistled for it. Like, dude, just because I mentally thought it would be fun to do it, don't do what I think you should do. Like, I'm a terrible just. I know that Jay Cutler just has this just like nice hittable face and all. Just try to relax it and not go that one extra step. That's the only. Like, really, Chad?
If they had called it for being a late hit, I probably wouldn't have been nearly as upset. I think the reason I didn't like it was because it was a shoulder-to-shoulder contact, and they called it for helmet-to-helmet.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why I'm upset. If they also think it was a late hit, I think there's a lot more latitude there in terms, because who knows what a late hit is. The way that they've been sort of, applying that. I think that I think it's a borderline late hit call, but I think it's not a helmet-to-helmet call. So, whatever.
While we're on the topic, the Bridgewater helmet hit was not necessary.
Amazing.
That was, I want to say, a little bit of acting ended up happening with that, just to help encourage the penalty, but. You have to. The
way that he was acting as if his helmet hurt. Like, he was acting as if an inanimate thing on his body was something that had nerve endings that he could feel. He was like, "Oh no, my visor!" It's so ridiculous.
Where will you be when the acid kicks in? It was sort of like that sort of situation. But yeah, I was like watching that, and initially you're like, yeah, Teddy's fine. But you felt, for a brief moment, felt bad for the Bears defender, because he clearly wanted out of the way of that, because a sliding quarterback is like, if you even look at them the wrong way, you're going to end up getting a 15-yard penalty, let alone if you trip and your head hits theirs. You might as well call a cab, because there's no good way of getting home after that.
It's always difficult because that's a penalty, and regardless of Bridgewater's acting, it's a penalty, and it was called a penalty.
You have to call that.
You probably have to call that. I always get really upset about penalties when the players are aware of what the penalty is and are doing the best they can to avoid it. And still calling those penalties. But the reason you call those penalties of course, is to deter other players at other times. It's not necessarily always to punish the player at the time, but it's to enforce the fact that there's a very little latitude, so that you can't get away with illegal hits that under another set of standards or circumstances would be a 50-50 call.
Yeah.
If you get rid of intent, now you don't have those 50-50 calls. So
did you see the Deadspin article of with the guy who with the hockey penalty? The guy's like, "No way I hit that! No way I hit that!" He goes into the penalty box, watches the replay, and just shrugs his shoulder like, "Oh, no, I totally belong here."
It's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that is great.
Like, oh, my bad. You're absolutely right, ref. I apologize. I totally had nope. That was my bad. That was my bad. We touched on him briefly, but let's talk a little bit more about Sendejo and his struggles. Not just this game, but this year. This just hasn't been really good for him so far this year. This game especially.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, it's like tough because like you acknowledge that Sendejo, had a poor showing, and then what? Like, and then it's like Robert Blanton. Like, I mean,
let us be clear. This is probably our best option right now.
Right. I think if Anton Exum isn't playing, I think there's a huge reason. Right. Like, I think the Vikings have like considered and have declined the option of playing Anton Exum. And, maybe he gets to play late in the season and he plays out of his mind and the Vikings were wrong to never have played him. And then we're all wrong for trusting the coaching staff to make the right decision in that case. But for now, I think that we can maybe reasonably assume that Andrew Sendejo is the best option. Yeah, I mean, he had, some issues in the game. I thought he had some issues taking run angles, especially for some reason after Matt Forte, was out. I don't know. It's he didn't make like a ton of enormous like mistakes, right? Like he was exploited in coverage a little bit, of course. I thought him against the tight end was an issue, and that's not a huge surprise because he can get bodied. He did do some pretty good work sort of early in the game when he was able to push back a ball carrier. I think actually a tight end, now that we mention it, I think it was Martellus Bennett, where he was able to prevent additional yards after the catch, which was kind of new for him. But yeah, it was kind of a mediocre game from him. This is definitely not, in his low light reel or anything like that. It's definitely not one of his worst games. But yeah, whenever you see this sort of thing, you always think like, hey man, if we could pair someone with Harrison Smith, that'd be pretty cool, huh?
Like if we could just, if we could pair somebody, it'd be different. I mean, it'd be nicer than the play that's happening currently anyway. Sharif Floyd missed the game. This was reported before the game, and how important was his absence, both in people stepping up and in the future as far as Floyd goes?
Yeah, I guess I haven't taken a big look into Floyd's sort of long-term prospects in terms of his injury recovery, but my understanding is that he should be back for the next game. If not, he should be back fairly soon afterwards. So in terms of the long-term problems with Floyd missing, I don't think that's necessarily a huge problem, but I've been on record before, either sort of on this podcast or in another appearance, that Floyd is actually one of the best defenders that the Vikings have, better than any of the linebackers. That includes Anthony Barr's, pretty phenomenal performances at times, better than, Xavier Rhodes or Everson Griffin or Terrence Newman. Basically, like, it's just Harrison Smith and Sharif Floyd at the top. And he's been kind of underrated because he hasn't been accumulating, like, the kind of sack totals that Aaron Donald has. And to be clear, Aaron Donald's a better player. I don't want to say, like, oh, he's just not getting noticed, but he's just as good. I mean, fine. Aaron Donald's a better player, but he's actually playing as one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL right now, and he's doing it by putting pressure on quarterbacks, by redirecting runners, and by clogging run lanes. He's doing a very good job of all of his responsibilities, and luckily, Tom Johnson, his backup, is also doing an extremely good job. He's been doing a very, very good job at generating hits and sacks and pressures. He's doing a very good job at redirecting runners and staying stout in the run lane, except in this game. In this game, I thought Tom Johnson did a pretty poor job, and a lot of that has to do with his work in the run game. Johnson has been kind of, pretty stalwart as a pass rusher. I thought he got a couple of hits on Cutler.
And I kind of liked him in pass rush situations. Some of it was kind of schemed open, on twists and stunts and stuff like that. But in the run game, he was actually fairly bad, and he got moved off the ball by Matt Slauson at times. By I totally forget who's playing opposite Vlad Dukas. But yeah, it was an interior line. It was an interior defensive line that the Vikings should have had all kinds of fun with, because it's not a very good interior defensive line. Like I mentioned, Vlad Dukas was on it. Matt Slauson was playing center for the first time since 2009, and he typically just doesn't play center. And then they had a different player play left guard. It was just bad. So I thought he should have had a good game, and he actually had a pretty poor game in terms of run defense, which it was poor enough that I think that if Matt Forte had not been out of the game, the Vikings probably would have lost. I think Sharif Floyd's absence and Tom Johnson's drop in play, replacing him, was significant enough that in a slightly different set of circumstances, the Vikings, may not have pulled out the win. So hopefully Sharif Floyd returns. Hopefully Tom Johnson returns to his previous form, because he's been pretty excellent otherwise so far. I don't know. Sharif Floyd is producing a lot in terms of generating basically help sacks. He's helping Everson Griffin get sacks. He's helping Brian Robinson get sacks and stuff like that. He helped Daniil Hunter get some pressures earlier in the year. Daniil Hunter, by the way, got his first sack in this game. So yeah, it's an issue, and I hope a lot of Zimmer defenses run through the 3-technique defensive tackle, and so hopefully he gets healthy soon.
That is definitely the hope of this podcast, anyway. So let's talk about the team as a whole for a moment. What does the Vikings' performance against weak teams tell us about their play against strong teams? They'll be up coming soon, including this coming week. Is this a team that sort of plays down to their competition? Because we saw this week against the Bears struggling at times, but ended up pulling it out, whereas we were playing really, really well against the defensively anyway. We're playing really, really well against the Broncos and just hanging in there with the Broncos, as opposed to the Packers, who got just their face crunched in, and it was such a beautiful thing to watch. Sorry, I just wanted to bring that up again. But is this a team that plays down to its competition?
I think that's a good question, and I think that, if we had wanted to, we could have devoted an entire podcast to how awesome, the Packers-Broncos game was. But
I was sitting next to a very vocal Packers fan watching that game, and trying really hard not to have like a smug look, or like not to say anything that was going to cause the room, cause like anger in the room to just start rising. I'm trying to like have all energy focused on the TV, as opposed to the guy who's just rocking in the recliner going, man, Bridgewater did much better against this defense. Like, what is... I mean, Manning's getting protection right now, but maybe that's the Green Bay defense and not, this isn't the elite Vikings defense that's running after Manning. Like, anyway. Yeah,
in terms of the Vikings holistically, I think, it's good that they have a couple of games already on their schedule where they, beat the tar out of some pretty bad teams, and the Lions and the Chiefs. Well, the Lions once, and the Chiefs. I think the other Lions game was close. I have a bad memory, so... Yep,
it was the one Lions game was close. The one in Minnesota was not, and the Chargers game was definitely not.
Right. So it's good that they've had a couple of games on the schedule where they do beat up on weaker teams, but there's only so much you can gain in terms of the knowledge you have about a team if they only have a weak schedule. Aside from the Broncos, the Vikings have only played, I don't think they've played any team outside of the top 20 of, I think, traditional power rankings. If you take a look at like ESPN, Sports Illustrated, etc., no teams outside of the top 20 in power rankings. No teams in the top half of opponent-adjusted point differential. They've had the weakest schedule in the league according to Football Outsiders DVOA and according to opponent point differential. And obviously that's not like an indictment of the Vikings. You have the schedule that you have. It's not like college where they like picked their schedule. But it does provide us with an information disadvantage when talking about the team. but it also like lets us know that, hey, these games coming up, they're going to be a little more difficult than the games that they've already had. And so the Vikings, who should know this, obviously, can't just assume that they're a 5-2 team. A lot of, typically a 5-2 team, regardless of their schedule, is pretty good. But we saw what happened to the 9-0 Chiefs, 2 years ago when they finally had the rough, part of their schedule. I think they had the first 9 games were really easy. The next 7 games were really tough, and they ended up, I think, 9-7 actually, or something like that. They might have ended up, 10-6, but they were not a 9-0 team. They were probably not an 8-8 team, but had a nice schedule. I think this is kind of similar for the Vikings, where it's difficult to be a bad team and go 5-2 regardless of your schedule, but maybe they're closer to a 4-3 team if they had sort of a league average schedule. I mean, obviously, I think the Chicago game maybe drives that home a little bit. But the Vikings have had good ups. Obviously, the Broncos game, the shellacking of the Lions. They've had some downs. Obviously, the 49ers game. I think the further we get away from the 49ers game, the less relevant it becomes in terms of, who are the Vikings.
Yeah, that really seems like the test that the instructor ends up dropping out, just dropping like your lowest score. Like it really does feel like that at this point. That team is not the same team that laced up against the Bears.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's I think that's a pretty good way to put it, drop your lowest score. And I think the true measure of the Vikings is probably the team. I think the closer measure of the Vikings is the team that we saw in Denver, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that this is also the team that we saw in Chicago. I think that we don't have enough information to see how the teams see how the team is, but I think that we do have some evidence that they don't just play to their opponent. These next 6 games are going to be really tough, and they're going to provide us a lot of information. If they come out of these next 6 games 3-3, honestly, I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, I was going to say, fans expected the Vikings to win the last 3 games, which they did. Is this a playoff team? 538 has the percentage that the Vikings make the playoffs at 53%. We are currently
that's interesting.
We are currently locked into the second wild card spot, which would put us in a very interesting game, an interesting matchup. But I just, is this a playoff team if we end up ripping through the next couple games and go 500?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Number Fire has the Vikings as like a 48% chance of making the playoffs, so not too far off of 538, but on the other side of 50-50. They're at least a 9-7 team. I think that when you take a look at metrics like 538 and DVOA and Number Fire, I think that the fact that the 49ers continue to do poorly and will continue to do poorly, of course, with Blaine Gabbert in, I think that that's going to hurt the Vikings from a metric standpoint, but I think sort of in the eyes of evaluators who only have like the last couple of games in mind, which, maybe that's superior, maybe that's not, it is a much better team. I think that for the most part, the Vikings are a one-and-done-ish kind of team in the playoffs. I think they're a wild card team that maybe doesn't necessarily get it done against sort of these top-level, offenses and defenses in the NFL. We saw that against Denver. I think they're a playoff-quality team. I think, obviously, consistency is maybe the biggest thing that they have to work on. The second biggest thing they have to work on is finding ways to make the first-half offense a little bit better. I think offensive woes are sort of overstated a little bit because of, the offense is kind of average, the defense is kind of above average, and that's usually a pretty good recipe for a playoff team. But, consistency will improve, the answer, I think.
Yeah, the team-by-team forecast on 538 is kind of interesting as far as the percentage for who's expected to make the playoffs and who's winning. Obviously, the Super Bowl favorite is the Patriots, but seeing the Vikings listed at 53% to make the playoffs is comforting for me anyway, and 18% to win the division, which would mean that we would have to face the Packers and either Aaron Rodgers gets hurt and doesn't end up playing those games, or our defense just roughs them up real good. And I'm okay with either of those, to be fair. Like, I am not picky between those two scenarios. I will be happy with either. But just saying, it would require something crazy. But we are already 3-0 in the division. And that's something that is pretty important, I feel. Like, that's not a bad way to start the year. So, yeah, I kind of want to see us go 500 through this next stretch and see what we can do, and if we pull off the win against the Packers, even better. But let's go a little bit of NFL news real quick. Ken Whisenhunt was fired from as the coach of the Tennessee Titans this week. In fact, he was fired today as coach. Too soon? Too early? What do you think?
Well, so I am pretty sympathetic to arguments about how it's kind of unfair. Like, I mean, so he only had like 5 games with the quarterback that he picked to be the starter and stuff like that. Like, okay, yeah, he only had 5 games with the guy, and one of those games was pretty good, I guess, the first one. But Ken Whisenhunt, I mean, he's just a bad coach. And if you realize that, like, if you're the owner or whatever organizational structure they have in Tennessee, it's a dysfunctional organization. But if you're the guy who gets to make this decision, right, and you realize or you come to the conclusion that Ken Whisenhunt is a bad coach, and in his last 5 seasons, he has gone below 300. I mean, he's like 297 or something like that. I mean, that's like a pretty good batting average. That's a terrible record. I mean, it's a pretty astounding batting average if we're going to talk baseball. But still, I mean, it's a terrible record to go below 300 in 5 seasons. You know, I was talking to Jed Zolgid's Hoodie, great Twitter account, very passionate Vikings fan. So, I was talking to him, and he was a little bit more defensive of Ken Whisenhunt in terms of whether or not he should have been fired. And he did bring up the point that, hey, the Titans are a dysfunctional organization, and hey, he only had 7 games, 5 of them with the starter. But there's a couple of things. The first is that if you just realize that he's a bad coach as an owner, you should probably make that decision sooner rather than later. But the second thing is, Ken Whisenhunt has a history of injuring his quarterbacks, and I think that's not necessarily just luck. I think that he doesn't pay very much attention to the offensive line or protection schemes or ways to protect the freaking quarterback. And that's complicated by the fact that he had Jake Locker at quarterback for a little bit, who's a bit injury prone. But I believe Mettenberger, Locker, whoever they had between Mettenberger and Locker, Mariota, they've all been injured under Whisenhunt, and a lot of that has to do with the number of hits that his quarterbacks take and how quickly those hits come. So, that's part of it. The team was not getting better. In fact, it was getting worse. Even if you take Mettenberger out of the equation, the defense was getting worse. And the best argument that Ken Whisenhunt has is that he was in the Super Bowl 7 years ago, which is okay, but when you realize that his quarterback was Kurt Warner and his coordinator was Todd Haley, that seems like a significantly less interesting accolade to have. I wrote.
And what's really weird is the people who've been ripping into Ken Whisenhunt since the firing, of all people, Matt Leinart went on Twitter and started ripping Ken Whisenhunt. In fact, said, quote, "Titans coach fired. Now Marcus Mariota has a chance." Wow. He doesn't even say Whisenhunt's name there. It's a tweet. You have a few extra characters. You could have done it, but just not even saying it by name. Titans coach fired. Dude's still not happy that his career ended the way it did. Apparently.
Of course it's ridiculous. It's Matt Leinart. That's hilarious. First, second, oh my god. You just don't really see that, about people talking about their former coaches in public like that. But third, maybe a little unfair from Leinart's perspective because, he had, I think he had 2 seasons under Denny Green. He had chances to prove himself. Denny Green got fired for a reason, and Leinart's one of them. But yeah, that was fire. That was crazy, and it was awesome to see.
Yeah, it's just strange to see. I don't want to say strange to see, but maybe the owners of the Titans have been watching the Miami Dolphins and going, well, they fired their coach, and all of a sudden they started taking genius pills. Maybe that's what we need to do to rally our team, is just to fire our coach who once went to a Super Bowl and didn't and didn't have to pay for his ticket. He went there as a coach. Maybe they were just looking at Miami and saw inspiration. Well, we should probably just do this now if we're looking to if this is some sort of a movie, we should probably do this now so there's time to like overcome this tragedy and then have some sort of a halfway decent ending to the season. Boy, it still seems like a raw deal considering he only had 5 games with Mariota.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem unfair, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I mean, he's a bad coach, and if you realize that he's a bad coach, he should go. But there's actually another parallel to the Miami situation, which is so Miami started getting good after they promoted their tight ends coach. You know who the interim head coach in Tennessee is right now? The former tight ends coach, Mike Mularkey.
You're kidding.
So
this is
absolutely.
To quote Alberto Gonzalez, I have no thoughts. I cannot This is exactly it. We hit exactly what happened. They looked at Florida. They looked down at Miami and went, well, this is clearly the recipe for success. Let's go promote our tight end coach. Oh man, I'm glad we had the podcast today. I feel like we figured out something that the rest of the league hasn't yet. Is that this
Cracked
is
the code.
We cracked the code. Excellent. That's why you listen to Norse Code. We can figure out the stupid ways in which teams are trying to copy each other. Why do you? I can't believe it's. I'm flabbergasted that it's that is the tight end coach. That's awesome. Speaking of people who are fired, Pep Hamilton was fired, and he's the offensive coordinator for the Colts, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not soon enough, or really, you're firing the guy the year that your star quarterback has 3 broken ribs. Like, which take are you going to be on this one?
Well, I've had issues with Pep Hamilton, I think, from year one. So I don't think he was fired soon enough, but I think that if you're blaming him for what's been happening on the field this year, it's maybe misplaced. I think the 3-4 broken ribs for Andrew Luck, that's pretty fair. Like, well, that's what's happening. But he's been a bad offensive coordinator for a while, and it's not just the broken ribs that are holding back the offense. I think that Luck has maybe not progressed as a quarterback. Even if you take into account, like, he's playing with discomfort. Discomfort's a really poor way of putting it. Playing with extreme pain. He is making like just bad decisions. And he is, he's not seeing the field. And, his throws are off maybe because of the pain and, stuff like that. But, like, the offense isn't being coordinated well. It's not being blocked well. It's not being run well. And the run-pass balance is, like, fluctuated pretty wildly. He did fix the run-pass balance after a little bit. Luck used to take, like, 650 attempts in a season. Now it's a little bit less. I've had issues with Pep Hamilton as an offensive coordinator who didn't know how to design an offense to close out games, despite the fact that he's been with Andrew Luck for a very long time. He's Andrew Luck's offensive coordinator at Stanford. So, but I think another thing to keep in mind is also, like, the personnel in Indy is bad, and that's Ryan Grigson's fault. And Ryan Grigson is one of the worst, I think, general managers in the NFL. I think the only thing that we can say was good about him that an idiot wouldn't have done, like draft Andrew Luck, is trade for Vontae Davis. That was a fantastic move. He did a really good job. Every other move is basically like just a bunch of questions. Drafting Jordan Werner, almost all of the drafts, especially the 2012 draft aside from Andrew Luck. Like Kobe Fleener and Dwayne Allen. Like, Dwayne Allen has been pretty good at times, especially as a blocking tight end, but, like, honestly. Drafting Philip Dorsett in the first round.
What about trading? What about trading
for Trent Richardson? Like, it's just awful.
I still can't believe that the Bears got
that much money.
I still can't believe that the Browns ended up convincing the Colts that this would be a really good idea for a first rounder.
It's incredible. Like, that's how bad your GM has to be. The Browns hoodwinked you. They're the people that the Vikings trick every single year in the draft. Every single year. And the Browns came out smelling like roses. And, I don't know. Ryan Grigson is just an awful GM. He's made awful free agency choices, like Andre Johnson and Frank Gore. Maybe I can understand that a little bit. Probably not both, especially when you have a rookie first-round receiver, even though you have Dante Moncrief and Taylor. Like, the allocation of resources doesn't make sense. Who you're allocating the resources to, doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of the free agency moves don't make sense. The trades, obviously, outside of Vontae Davis, didn't make sense. And you can't really give him credit for drafting someone anyone would have drafted, Andrew Luck. So, That's the real problem. And Chuck Pagano's been an issue too, but maybe he's better with a better offensive coordinator. Who knows? But like Ryan Grigson, the guy who gets the personnel for those coaches, is a huge problem. So yeah, Pep Hamilton, maybe he should have been fired because he's not a great offensive coordinator, but that doesn't solve the problem.
You have to think Pagano is gone after the season, right? Like, there's no way they end up bringing him back.
Yeah, which is kind of like crazy to think, of course, right? Because when he was hired in 2012, him and Andrew Luck, they took the Colts to the playoffs after like a 2-14 season. Why? Can you believe that you would fire that coach? Absolutely yes, especially because Bruce Arians was part of that, and now he's gone. So it's like weird that the Colts should have kept Bruce Arians over the guy who couldn't have the job because he had cancer. Like, there's no way you can make that move, right? Like, you can't be like, sorry, Chuck, I know you had cancer and another coach stepped up to do your job, but he's better. Like, you can't lose your job to freaking cancer.
No, you can't. There's just no good way of doing that at all.
Right. And so it's like kind of weird that was a situation where the Colts had to let Bruce Arians leave. But Pagano's not been a great coach. I would think that he's probably gone, but I think the smartest move is to get rid of Grigson and like the entire coaching staff. Or, I mean, you could do what the Vikings did, which is get rid of the head coach. And in this case, get rid of Grigson. Then the new GM fires Pagano, but keeps the other coaches on contract if the new coach wants them, which is kind of like a shitty hiring practice, but it's a really great way to treat your new head coach, whoever that's going to be.
There is that. We're cold people here at Norse Code, you, Dusty, and I can't even imagine one of us doing that. Like, you're losing your job due to cancer. Like, I can't.
Yeah, right. Like, I couldn't. I don't think I could do it. And we're pretty cold, analytical people.
The discussions that we have pre and post show end up being fairly cut and awful at times. But yeah, I can't imagine doing that. Even to Dusty, I can't imagine doing that. Well, no, I cannot imagine doing that. So a couple other notes to mention. It looks like Johnny Football is going to end up starting for Thursday night's game. This has DFS implications because I imagine his price is real low. But he looks like he's going to end up starting, and McCown is going to be on the bench because of his injury. Yeah,
the broken ribs. Turns out actually you shouldn't play with broken ribs.
Yeah, unless your name is Andrew Luck, and even in that case, it's kind of questionable. The Colts are going to get into some silly amount of trouble for that whole like not disclosing an injury thing, right?
You'd have to think so, right? Because
even if that's just for gambling purposes, like, it's still disingenuous to the other team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's like ridiculous that
unless you're Bill Belichick. Apparently, you can do that if you're Bill Belichick. Not if your owner is.
Brady's been probable with a shoulder injury for like 20 consecutive weeks, right? So
we just don't even have him on the thing anymore. It's like, yeah, he's fine.
But Johnny Manziel is going to start. It's going to be kind of fun to watch him play because it's always fun to watch Johnny Football play, even when he's terrible. He's probably better this season than he was last time. He looked okay in his outing this week, and then also he looked pretty okay in the preseason. But, he's probably a disaster. I'm probably going to take, for DFS, I'm probably going to take a couple of darts at him in like 25-cent leagues and just see what I can do with Johnny Manziel at quarterback. But for the most part, I think the DFS implication is actually pretty similar to the Blaine Gabbert over Colin Kaepernick implication, which is I'm starting the opposing defense in a lot of my lineups. I'm starting Cincinnati and I'm starting Atlanta. So, yeah, that's gonna be interesting. Johnny Football is fun, especially for Vikings fans, because there's a real possibility that the Vikings would have drafted Johnny Football instead of the Browns. If the Vikings were I believe this. Some people don't, but I think that I'm pretty confident that the Vikings were trying to trade up for Johnny Manziel and missed. And then also every Vikings fan was debating this. Should they get Teddy Bridgewater or Johnny Manziel, or Derek Carr, Blake Bortles? But really, it was Bridgewater and Manziel. A lot of people wanted Manziel. A lot of people hated Manziel. And so you get to hate watch or nostalgia watch this game.
I was going to say this is a primetime game. This is the only game that's on Thursday night. All the eyes of the nation are going to be on Johnny Football. Could this be his Josh Freeman against the Giants game, where it's just it ends him completely like, oh, so that's the stink of Johnny Football. All right, we've seen it. We can move on. CBS is actually apologizing for airing the game.
Well, actually, I don't think CBS has this game. I think this is the first Thursday night game this year that'll be on the NFL Network. So
you are absolutely right.
Going to be insulated from it.
Go to a bar with the NFL Network just to watch Johnny Football play.
But yeah, I don't know if he's going to have a Josh Freeman game. That would be pretty epic.
Well, that's, no one is going to have a Josh Freeman game, but I was just, stinking it up on a national stage and having everyone just, write you off as a starter completely after that point. But that would take one hell of a game, and I don't think he's got it in him.
Yeah, no, the one thing you may want to take away from a DFS perspective is he does like targeting that Travis Benjamin kid a lot, so maybe play him. But yeah, I think it's going to go poorly.
Last thing to talk about is the trade deadline. It's real quiet this year, with the exception of Vernon Davis to Denver. That has some interesting implications.
Yeah, no, Denver is like in it to win it. They tried to trade for Joe Thomas as well, and it looks like they're willing to give up future assets to get a team together now because I think they sense obviously they sense the window's closing. They've had a pretty weak tight end game, as it were, and Vernon Davis. If they get 2013 Vernon Davis, which is 2 years ago, obviously, they're in for a ride. Vernon Davis has been mediocre this year. A lot of that obviously is Colin Kaepernick, who was just benched for Blaine Gabbert. But Vernon Davis has been like at issue for a while. I think some pretty reasonably intelligent 49ers fans that I know wanted him to be cut before 2014, and it turns out they were right. So who knows what kind of Vernon Davis they'll get him. He's obviously old, but he's one of the single most athletic players to have ever gone through the combine testing process. Period. So he has a lot longer to fall than a lot of people. So he's still probably reasonably athletic enough to play. But I think that's going to be sort of like a wild card in terms of its impact on Denver. They obviously believe in it. We'll see. But Denver is really sensing that the window's closing, and it makes sense, right? I mean, I don't think anyone else is like disagreeing with that idea.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that this is going to be the last year of Manning, and then you look at this defense, like this defense is super strong. They're like, okay, what can we do to help with protection? What can we do to get another body out there for another weapon for Peyton? Like, what do we do to make this happen now? That this move just screams now. We have to do something now.
Yeah, and especially when you pair it with the fact that they were willing to give up assets for a left tackle. Yeah, absolutely. They're win now.
Yep, exactly. Well, that is going to be it for Norse Code this week. Thank you for listening. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can go to the bottom of the page and click on the donate link. You can also find the link to our Patreon there as well. You can click on that and become a sustaining member to the show. We're just trying to keep the lights on here and try to keep the ads off of the show as much as possible. We do appreciate being funded by the listeners, so thank you for listening and thank you for helping us out with that. Arif, do you have anything to plug?
Not yet. We'll see.
Not yet, we'll see. We, however, will have another episode later this week where we're going to talk about the Rams game. Luckily, this game will not be happening in St. Louis, so there is very little chance of someone tearing their ACL out on the concrete surrounding the field. That is not going to happen at this game. So we have the Rams Vikings game to talk about. We'll also be doing a mailbag and a nice little DFS segment between you and Dusty. So that will be happening here shortly. Again, thank you for listening. You can subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher Radio as well. And our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. I'll see you later this week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.
Well, if you've stuck around this long, it must mean that you're interested in the Norse Code Fantasy League. And we all feel sorry for you. But we do have a couple things to mention about the Norse Code Fantasy League. Every game but one appeared to be a blowout this week. I lost to $1 Million Shack. It was not pretty. It was not necessarily a blowout, but it was really close. The Ghost of Al Davis ended up losing 97.4 to 114.88 against the $1 Million Shack. That was not my best performance. $1 Million Shack moves to 400, or moves to 4-4 rather, for the year. I moved to 2-6. There is currently a 3-way tie for last place at 2-6. So let's keep going. Ooh Yes ends up beating Blount Force Trauma 125 to 83. Another big loss. Also moving on to The Fall is Coming, loses to the Minnesota Midgets 64 to 123. A day full of blowouts. Next one, TBA ends up besting Can You Dig It 94 to 55. Arif ends up demolishing Kyle's team 107.84 to 57.3. Not a great showing by Carlos's crazy team. The one real close game ended up being Dusty's game, and Dusty ended up winning. The Breezes was with him, ends up winning 114.24 to 106.14. And in case you're curious, how did Dusty end up getting that amount of points? I'll tell you, even though he started Mike Wallace, who had 0 points. Even though he started the New York Jets defense, which ended up with only 6, he ended up scoring 47.54 points due to the play of Drew Brees. Wow. So, just shows you, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. So, next week, however, has an interesting little wrinkle because we have Dusty and I playing each other. We have not played each other this year, and it's time for Ball Ghazi Green Ellis to accept the fact that they are a subpar team against the terrible Ghost of Al Davis. So I am looking forward to who ends up winning that one. Let's go to the standings now and see who's winning. Eric ended up renaming his team for The Fall is Coming. They are currently in first place with 6-2. You're in Trouble, Jeffrey and Hyde, TBA, the Minnesota Midgets, and Ooh Yes, record-wise, are in second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Wow, there's a lot of 5-3 teams in this league. Everything else ends up dropping off pretty quickly. Blount Force, $1 Million Shack is in 7th with 4-4. Blount Force Trauma is also 4-4. Can You Dig It is in 9th place with 3-5. And here come the rest of the pack with Ghost of Al Davis 2-6. Carlos's crazy team 2-6, and Dusty's Ball Ghazi Green Ellis with 2-6. Thank you for listening, and keep Teddy alive.